3 nights ago, I had the most terrifying conversation of my life. And it wasn't with a person. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I've been questioning everything since it happened. But what I was told in that conversation has shaken me to my core, and I can't keep it to myself anymore. Maybe if I share this with you, it'll help me process what I experienced. And maybe, just maybe, it'll save your spiritual life. It happened during what I thought was just another restless night. I'd been struggling spiritually for months, feeling disconnected from God despite doing all the right things. Reading my Bible daily, attending church, listening to worship music, praying before meals. But something was missing. I felt like I was going through the motions, like there was a wall between me and the divine that I couldn't break through. That night, as I lay in bed frustrated and spiritually empty, I found myself in what I can only describe as the most vivid encounter of my life. I was standing in a place that defied description. It wasn't quite a room, wasn't quite outdoors. The light seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, warm and golden, like being inside liquid sunlight. And then he was there. I knew instantly who it was, not because of any physical appearance I'd seen in paintings or movies, but because of something deeper. A presence that made every cell in my body recognize holiness. His eyes held a mixture of infinite love and deep concern that made my heart race. "Jonathan," he said, and his voice carried the weight of eternity, "we need to talk." I wanted to fall to my knees, to worship, to hide, but he gestured for me to sit on what appeared to be a simple wooden bench that materialized beside us. "I've been watching you struggle," he continued, "and I've been watching millions of my followers struggle with the same thing. They think the problem is that they're not doing enough for me. But the truth is far more dangerous than that." My throat felt dry as I managed to whisper, "What do you mean?" His expression grew more serious, and I felt a chill despite the warmth surrounding us. "There are 4 habits," he said, "for seemingly innocent patterns that are spiritually killing my people. They're so subtle, so disguised as righteousness, that most believers practice them daily without realizing they're slowly suffocating their souls." I felt my hands trembling. "What habits?" He looked at me with eyes that seemed to see straight through every pretense I'd ever built. "Habits that you've been practicing, Jonathan. Habits that have built that wall you've been feeling between us. And you're not alone. These 4 patterns are spreading through the body of believers like a silent epidemic, leaving millions feeling spiritually dead while thinking they're spiritually alive." The weight of his words hit me like a physical force. "But I've been trying so hard," I said, my voice breaking. "I read my Bible, I pray, I serve at church." He nodded sadly. "That's exactly the problem. You've been trying so hard to do the right things that you've forgotten how to simply be with me. These 4 habits masquerade as spiritual maturity, but they're actually barriers that keep you from experiencing the abundant life I promised." He stood up and began walking, motioning for me to follow. "Come," he said, "let me show you what's really happening to the hearts of my people. But I warn you, what you're about to discover will challenge everything you think you know about following me." As we walked deeper into that impossible place, I felt both terrified and hopeful. Terrified because I sensed I was about to have my entire spiritual foundation shaken. Hopeful because for the first time in months, I felt truly connected to the divine presence I'd been desperately seeking. "The first habit," he said as we approached what looked like a vast mirror stretching into infinity, "is the one that's probably destroying your spiritual life right now, and you don't even know it." I stared at my reflection in that endless mirror, and what I saw there made me gasp. It wasn't just my face looking back at me. It was the face of someone who had been slowly dying spiritually while convinced they were growing closer to God. What I discovered in that mirror about my own spiritual condition was so shocking, so unexpected, that it changed everything I thought I knew about following Christ. And when he revealed what millions of believers are doing every single day that's actually pushing them further from God while making them feel more religious, I realized why so many of us feel spiritually empty despite our best efforts. But before I tell you what that first habit is, I need you to know something. This isn't just my story. According to what I was shown, this is happening to believers everywhere. Pastors, worship leaders, longtime Christians, new converts. We're all falling into these same 4 traps, And most of us have no idea we're trapped. If you've ever felt like your prayers bounce off the ceiling, if you've ever wondered why other Christians seem more spiritually alive than you, if you've ever felt guilty about feeling distant from God despite doing all the right things, then you need to hear what happens next. Because what I learned about the first habit is going to expose something you're probably doing right now that's slowly killing your spiritual life. But first, I need to know, are you ready to have your understanding of spiritual growth completely transformed? Let me know in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed because what I'm about to reveal in the next part will shock you. As I stared into that infinite mirror, Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder. Suddenly, I could see beyond my reflection. Thousands, then millions of faces appeared, believers from every corner of earth, all wearing the same expression I'd been carrying for months. Spiritual hunger mixed with confusion. Love for God mixed with frustration. Do you see them? He asked, his voice heavy with sorrow. These are my people. They read devotionals over coffee, listen to worship music during commutes, attend Bible studies every week. They're doing everything they think they should. But look at their eyes. I leaned closer and gasped. Behind all the religious activity, their eyes were hollow. Tired. Desperate. They're spiritually starving, I whispered. He nodded gravely. They consume more spiritual content than any generation in history. More sermons, books, conferences, worship music. But they're getting spiritually thinner by the day. The mirror shifted, showing me heartbreaking scenes. Believers praying with tears, begging God to feel closer. Pastors in their offices wondering why their own spiritual lives felt dry despite preaching powerful sermons. Worship leaders leading thousands while feeling completely disconnected from God's presence. This is what happens when my people mistake activity for relationship, Jesus said, his voice breaking. When they confuse consumption with transformation. More devastating images appeared. Marriages crumbling because spouses were too busy serving in ministry to love each other. Children walking away from faith because they saw religion but never witnessed relationship. How many are caught in this? I asked, dreading the answer. More than you imagine, he replied. The 4 habits I'm about to show you have become so normalized that calling them out feels controversial. The mirror revealed believers who'd followed these patterns for decades, more religious but less relational, more knowledgeable but less intimate, busier but emptier. Why show me this? I asked, overwhelmed. His eyes blazed with intensity. Because someone needs to sound the alarm. My people think their struggles mean they're not doing enough. But their struggles exist because what they're doing is creating barriers between us. He gestured, and the images shifted to something beautiful, believers who'd broken free from these habits. Their faces radiated peace. Their prayers were intimate conversations, not desperate pleas. Their worship was authentic expression, not performance. This is what I want for every follower, he said. Not religious exhaustion, but spiritual vitality. But they must recognize these 4 habits first. The mirror faded as Jesus turned to face me directly. What I'm about to show you will expose why millions feel spiritually empty despite their best efforts. Are you ready to see the first habit that's been killing your spiritual life? The anticipation was unbearable. After months of struggle, I was finally about to understand what had gone wrong. But I sensed this revelation would shatter everything I thought I knew about spiritual growth. The mirror vanished, and suddenly we stood in an enormous library. But these weren't ordinary books, they glowed with spiritual energy. Thousands of devotionals, sermons, worship playlists floating in the air. It was breathtaking, but Jesus looked heartbroken. This is the spiritual diet of modern believers, he said sadly. More content than any generation in history. But look closer. I saw people frantically consuming speed-reading devotionals, binge-listening sermons, collecting spiritual insights like trophies. Their eyes were hungry, but their souls looked empty. The first habit killing believers spiritually, Jesus said, his voice echoing, is spiritual consumption without transformation. My people think intake equals growth. But spiritual food, like physical food, must be digested to nourish. I watched a woman devour 5 devotionals in minutes, highlighting, taking notes, moving to the next one. She'll do this for hours, Jesus said, feeling productive, feeling spiritual. But tomorrow, ask her how any of it changed her heart. She won't remember. My stomach dropped. I recognized myself. When did you last meditate on one verse for an entire day? Jesus asked, his eyes piercing through me. When did you let one sermon challenge you for weeks instead of immediately moving to the next one? I couldn't answer. I was always consuming next devotional, next sermon, next book. Never digesting. Never applying. Spiritual consumption has become entertainment, Jesus continued. They collect insights like possessions, but their hearts remain unchanged. He showed me a man listening to his 5th sermon while multitasking, barely paying attention. Sacred words becoming background noise. A person who eats constantly but never digests will starve despite a full stomach, Jesus said. Believers who consume constantly but never apply will die spiritually despite feeling informed. Through a window, I saw the tragic results. People quoting hundreds of verses but lacking kindness toward family. Believers who'd heard thousands of sermons about love but couldn't forgive. Christians knowing every worship song but feeling disconnected from God's presence. They think the solution is more consumption, Jesus said, his voice breaking. Feeling distant from me? Add another devotional. Struggling with faith? Listen to more sermons. Spiritually dry? Attend more conferences. They're solving a digestion problem with more food. I've been doing this, I whispered, horrified. For months, I'd consumed hours of spiritual content daily, feeling proud of my discipline. But I couldn't remember yesterday's devotional or how last week's sermon changed my behavior. This habit feels righteous, Jesus warned. People praise spiritual consumers as dedicated. But consumption without application isn't growth, it's spiritual hoarding. The books began piling up around the consumers, creating walls that separated them from real relationships, real transformation, real intimacy with God. They're so busy consuming information about me, Jesus said, they have no time to simply be with me. In a quiet corner, a few people sat with single, worn books, reading slowly, pausing to pray, reflecting deeply. Their faces glowed with peace the frantic consumers lacked. How do I break this? I asked desperately. Jesus smiled. Tomorrow, take one verse. Read it slowly. Ask me what I want to show you. Spend the day letting it work in your heart. One verse digested is worth more than 100 chapters consumed. I didn't call you to be a spiritual consumer, Jonathan. I called you to be my disciple. Discipleship isn't about how much you know, it's about how much you're willing to let that knowledge change you. The first habit was exposed, but 3 more remained, each more shocking than the last. If consumption without transformation was deadly, what were the other habits doing to our souls? Comment if you recognize this habit, and subscribe because the second habit Jesus revealed will shatter everything you think you know about prayer. The library dissolved, and we stood before a massive stage with blinding spotlights. Thousands of believers performed frantically, praying harder when they'd been good, avoiding God when they'd messed up, measuring His love by their circumstances. The second habit, Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow, is treating your relationship with me like a performance review. I watched in horror as believers exhausted themselves trying to earn God's approval. They prayed more after good days, hid after bad ones. Their spiritual lives were emotional roller coasters based on their behavior. But don't we need to live righteously? I asked, confused. Jesus pointed to a woman kneeling center stage, tears streaming down her face. She made a mistake yesterday and now believes I love her less. She's trying to pray her way back into my good graces. My heart broke watching her desperate performance. I never asked for performance, Jesus said firmly. I asked for relationship. But my people have turned Christianity into spiritual anxiety, never sure where they stand with me. He showed me a man who hadn't prayed in weeks because he felt too ashamed of his failures. He thinks I'm disappointed in him, so he's avoiding me. The very time he needs me most, performance-based thinking pushes him away. I've done this, I whispered, remembering countless times I'd avoided prayer after failing, as if God didn't already know my struggles. This habit is deadly because it makes my love conditional, Jesus continued. But my love isn't based on your performance, it's based on my nature. I don't love you more when you're good or less when you fail. The stage began cracking under the weight of exhausted performers. They're dying trying to maintain a spiritual image instead of resting in my acceptance, Jesus said sadly. He gestured to a quiet corner where some people sat peacefully, not performing but simply talking with him like a friend. These understand grace, he said. They know my love isn't earned, it's given. Your mistakes don't make you less worthy of love, Jesus said, looking directly at me. They make you more human, more able to show compassion to others who struggle. The stage collapsed completely, and in its place grew a beautiful garden where people walked freely with God. No spotlights, no performance, just genuine relationship. Stop trying to impress me, Jonathan, Jesus said gently. I'm not a demanding boss waiting for you to mess up. I'm your loving Father who rejoices when you simply come home. If performance-based faith was killing believers' souls, what was the third habit doing to destroy their authenticity? The next revelation will expose how we've been living double lives without even realizing it. Subscribe now because what's coming will challenge everything you believe about living as a Christian. The garden vanished, and we stood inside a house with walls made of glass. But these weren't normal rooms, they were labeled Sunday faith, Monday business, family life, social media, work ethics. Each room contained the same person living completely differently. The third habit, Jesus said, his voice filled with grief, is compartmentalized faith. My people have divided their lives into sacred and secular boxes, never realizing they're destroying their souls. I watched in shock as the same believer acted like a saint on Sunday, then cheated customers on Monday. Worshipped passionately in church, then gossiped viciously with friends. Posted inspirational verses online, then lived with hidden addictions. But we can't be perfect all the time, I protested. I'm not talking about perfection, Jesus replied firmly. I'm talking about authenticity. This person isn't struggling with sin, they're living multiple lives. He pointed to a woman in the Sunday faith room, hands raised in worship, tears streaming down her face. Then the scene shifted to the work-life room where the same woman ruthlessly destroyed a colleague's reputation for personal gain. She's not the same person, Jesus said sadly. She's created different versions of herself for different environments. This isn't human weakness, it's spiritual schizophrenia. My stomach churned as I recognized myself. Different language with church friends versus co-workers. Different ethics for business versus ministry. Different priorities for career versus kingdom. This habit is soul poison, Jesus continued, because it fragments your identity. You become multiple people instead of one authentic person following me everywhere. The glass walls began cracking, showing the devastating effects. Families falling apart because parents preached love but practiced control. Businesses failing because owners claimed integrity but operated in deception. Churches splitting because leaders taught unity but lived division. Your children see through this, Jesus said, his voice breaking. They watch you worship on Sunday then curse on Monday. They hear you preach forgiveness then refuse to forgive family members. This hypocrisy drives more people from faith than any atheist argument ever could. I saw teenagers walking away from their parents' faith, not because they rejected God, but because they rejected the fake versions they witnessed at home. How do I fix this? I asked, feeling the weight of my own duplicity. Jesus smiled sadly. Stop trying to manage different versions of yourself. Bring all of you to me, your work struggles, your family tensions, your secret battles. Let me be Lord of your Monday morning as much as your Sunday worship. He showed me a few people whose rooms had no walls. They were the same person everywhere. Their faith wasn't perfect, but it was real. They struggled openly, loved consistently, and lived authentically. Integrity isn't about being perfect, Jesus said. It's about being whole. One person, following one Lord, living one authentic life. The fractured house collapsed, replaced by a simple, beautiful home with no walls. just authentic people living transparently with God in every area of life. 3 habits exposed, but the 4th was the most toxic of all. If compartmentalized faith was fragmenting souls, what was the final habit doing to poison the entire body of believers? Subscribe, because what Jesus revealed about the 4th habit will expose the deadliest spiritual cancer destroying churches worldwide. The peaceful home dissolved, and we stood in a twisted arena filled with believers comparing themselves to each other. Some stood on pedestals looking down with pride, others cowered in shadows consumed by spiritual inadequacy. The air reeked of jealousy and judgment. The 4th and deadliest habit, Jesus said, his voice trembling with anger, is comparison and spiritual competition. This poison has infected my body like cancer, turning brothers into rivals and sisters into enemies. I watched in horror as believers measured their prayer lives against others, envied spiritual gifts, judged worship styles, and competed for who seemed most holy. Social media feeds became spiritual scorecards: who posted the most verses, attended the most services, served the most hours. But don't we learn from other believers? I asked, disturbed by the toxic atmosphere. Learning and comparing are different, Jesus replied sharply. Learning says, teach me. Comparing says, judge me versus them. He pointed to a woman staring bitterly at another believer's Instagram post about a powerful prayer time. She's not inspired, she's inferior. She's not learning, she's competing. Her focus shifted from growing closer to me to measuring herself against others. My heart sank recognizing my own jealousy toward believers who seemed more spiritually mature, more gifted, more blessed. This habit produces 2 spiritual diseases, Jesus continued. Pride when you think you're ahead, and despair when you think you're behind. Both are deadly. The arena split into 2 sections. In one, believers looked down on others' denominations, worship styles, and spiritual practices with smug superiority. In the other, believers felt worthless, comparing their struggles to others' highlight reels. I watch pastors compare church sizes instead of heart transformation, Jesus said, his voice breaking. I see worship leaders compete for who creates the most emotional experience instead of authentic connection with me. I witness believers judge each other's spiritual journeys instead of focusing on their own. The most devastating scene showed parents raising children in this competitive spiritual environment. Kids learned to perform religion instead of relationship, to judge others instead of love them, to compete instead of commune. This is why my church is divided, Jesus said, tears in his eyes. Why denominations fight over methods instead of unite around me. Why believers gossip about each other's failures instead of restore each other with grace. I watched relationships crumble under the weight of spiritual competition. Friends became enemies over theological differences. Families split over worship preferences. Churches divided over leadership styles. Your spiritual journey is between you and me, Jesus said firmly, looking directly at me. No one else's opinion matters. No one else's progress affects your relationship with me. Stop looking sideways at others and look up at me. He showed me a small group of believers who had eyes only for him, not comparing, not competing, not judging. They were different denominations, different styles, different gifts, but united in authentic love for God and each other. This is my dream, Jesus whispered. Unity in diversity. Love instead of competition. Each person running their own race while cheering others on. The toxic arena crumbled, replaced by a beautiful garden where believers of all backgrounds worship together, not uniformly, but harmoniously. All 4 deadly habits exposed. But the most important question remained: how do we break free from these soul-killing patterns and experience the spiritual vitality Jesus promised? Subscribe, because the final section will reveal the pathway to transformation that could save your spiritual life. The garden around us began to glow with an intensity that took my breath away. Jesus turned to face me, his eyes blazing with hope and determination. Now comes the most important part, he said. Breaking free from these soul killers and experiencing the abundant life I promised. The 4 deadly habits appeared before us like chains: spiritual consumption, performance faith, compartmentalized living, and toxic comparison. But as Jesus touched each one, they shattered into dust. "Here's your pathway to freedom," he said, his voice filled with power. "Instead of endless consumption, practice sacred digestion. Take one verse, one truth, one encounter with me, and let it marinate in your soul for days. Stop collecting spiritual insights and start being transformed by them. Quality over quantity. Depth over breadth. Instead of performance anxiety, rest in radical grace. My love isn't a report card, it's a relationship. Come to me broken, come to me failing, come to me struggling. I'm not impressed by your perfection, I'm moved by your presence." Instead of compartmentalized living, embrace integrated authenticity. Bring all of you to all of me. Let me be Lord of your Monday morning meetings and your Saturday night struggles. Stop managing multiple versions of yourself and become one authentic person following me everywhere. Instead of toxic comparison, focus on intimate connection. Your spiritual journey is between you and me. Stop looking sideways at others and look up at me. Run your own race. Celebrate others without competing. Love without comparing. As he spoke, I felt something breaking inside me: years of spiritual exhaustion, religious performance, and comparison-driven anxiety crumbling away. "But how do I start?" I asked, feeling both hope and overwhelm. Jesus smiled, the same smile that had first brought me peace in that wheat field. "Start tomorrow morning. Before you grab your phone, before you check devotionals, before you consume anything, just sit with me. Talk to me like a friend. Listen for my voice. Let one simple truth take root in your heart." The garden around us transformed into something beyond description, believers from every nation, denomination, and background living authentically, loving genuinely, growing steadily. No performance, no competition, no compartments. Just real people in real relationship with a real God. "This is what I've always wanted," Jesus said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Not religious robots, but beloved children. Not spiritual consumers, but transformed disciples. Not performers, but partners in relationship." He placed his hand on my shoulder, and I felt a warmth that reached the deepest parts of my soul. "Jonathan, you have a choice. Continue the habits that have been slowly killing your spiritual life, or step into the freedom I'm offering. The abundant life I promised isn't found in more religious activity, it's found in authentic relationship with me." The scene began to fade, but his final words burned into my heart. "Tell them, Jonathan. Tell my people they don't have to live spiritually exhausted anymore. Tell them I'm waiting not for their performance, but for their presence. Tell them the kingdom of heaven isn't about doing more, it's about being loved more than they ever imagined possible." I woke up with tears streaming down my face, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of frustration. They were tears of freedom. 3 days have passed since that encounter, and my spiritual life has been completely transformed. Not because I'm doing more, but because I'm resting more. Not because I'm performing better, but because I'm relating authentically. The 4 habits that were killing my soul have been replaced with life-giving practices that have brought me closer to God than I've ever been. If you recognize any of these 4 soul-killing habits in your own life, you don't have to stay trapped. Freedom is possible. Authentic relationship with God is available. The abundant spiritual life Jesus promised can be yours, starting today. Which habit do you need to break first? Let me know in the comments. And if this message has impacted your spiritual journey, hit that subscribe button. Your soul is too precious to waste on spiritual counterfeits when the real thing is waiting for you.